The theologian Richard John Newhouse wrote in the journal First Things about St. Philip Neri, who in the 1500s headed a monastery. Neri gave a most unusual penance to a novice monk who was guilty of spreading malicious gossip. He told him to take a feather pillow to the top of a church tower on a blustery day and there release all the feathers to the wind. Then he was to come down from the tower, collect all the feathers dispersed over the far countryside, and put them back into the pillow. Of course, he couldn't do it, and that was precisely Philip's point about the great evil of slander. Slander has a way of spreading to the four winds, and once released, can never be completely recalled. Even when accusations are firmly nailed as false, the reputations of those falsely accused bear a lingering taint. Oh yes, it's vaguely said. Wasn't he once accused of...
Our community was founded almost 40 years ago by my parents on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, New York. Pretty rough place. And they did it because they made a choice to open their lives and their hearts to help people in great need. That was the beginning, but that's still our mission today, is to open our lives and help people in need. And as a community, we believe we have a wonderful life. And when you have something wonderful, your impulse is to share it. And that's what we've tried to do. We love watching school children on a field trip see the animals, to watch the face of a child when he holds a baby chick in his hand, and see the thrill and the awe at that new life. To see visitors appreciate the what goes into making a pot or a piece of furniture the traditional way. And it's been our desire to open our lives. We have more than 50,000 visitors pass through our farm every year. At the Thanksgiving festival, I mean, I've never seen a place where children are more happy. And in our music programs, our worship also, it's a chance for us to share with others something that we believe is wonderful.
We've got a relatively small group of ex-members who are hostile to us. Most of them we ask to leave for various problems, various needs. They've gotten together, they've talked about their stories and rehashed them, and they've really grown in antagonism and accusations against us over the years. They tried various outlets and ways in which they could spread their stories against us, and when those did not have the effect that they wanted, they ultimately found the ear of reporters in the media that were willing to spend lots of time with them. They saw the makings of a juicy story, and by the time we were ever involved, we realized that the storyline was predetermined. We realized that there was an extremely strong bias that was already present, and that we just did not see that our side of the story and our perspective on all this was ever going to be able to be accurately portrayed by participating with them in the story, and that's why we declined it. It's our hope that in doing this, that it'll give us a chance to share our hearts with everybody else, and for them to be able to see that there really is a different perspective to the face that the media is trying to paint on our community.
Why are ex-members so bitter towards you? Why are they saying these things if they're not true? And it's a very good question. It's a legitimate question. And the answer is that many of them are not. Many ex-members are not bitter toward us. Many of them are still our friends. The question is about these who are voicing these kind of false accusations against us.
In one way, it's not hard to imagine how these stories generate, because I've seen it before in people. When you've experienced something wonderful and you decide you can't do it, you can't live up to the standard, then you walk away from it, you've lost it, and somehow you've got to justify what you've done.
And that's their right and that's their choice. But sometimes they can be embittered. Just as in a divorce where people have been so close and shared so much, it's become a syndrome that the spouses will end up incredibly hostile and hateful toward each other.
When you've made the kind of commitment, when you've lived the life that we share and have made the kind of commitment to it that it involves, you don't live the life that we live just on a whim. It takes commitment. And when you make that kind of commitment, you enjoy the fruit of that kind of life. You share the closeness of relationship, the depth of relationship, and then you walk away from it. You're going to have to give an answer. You're going to have an explanation for that.
And the best way to justify it is to say, it was something terrible I walked away from. But if it was really something terrible, you would just be happy you got away. But if something in you thinks you might have done the wrong thing, then you've got to convince yourself, and more than that, you've got to convince everybody else that it was something terrible and I had to do it. Because in your heart, you're longing to have what you don't have anymore.
I remember one of the young men, we worked with him for years to try to help him overcome various social and ethical dysfunctions. I considered him a friend. He had a soft heart, he was a sweet guy, but he made the choice, I'm not going to continue to deal with my ills any longer. All we really tried to do was help him, try to help him become something more than he really ended up choosing to be. And that's the unfortunate and sad part in the whole thing.
Well, I have a PhD in religious studies from Rice University, and some of the courses I took there had to do with sociology of religion, and I was especially interested in non-traditional religious groups. I grew up in one that was not traditional, and my experience growing up was that people who left our church sometimes were bitter and said things that I knew were not true about our church. And this is a well-known phenomenon among sociologists of religion, that ex-members of high-demand religious organizations often turn against them. When there is a high-demand religious situation or context, it's often the case, and I would say always the case, that somebody leaves the group, either voluntarily or is asked to leave, it can happen both ways, and complains bitterly about things they knew were the case when they were there as far as rules and regulations and lifestyle and so forth. And often just tell untruths, lie about things. I experienced that growing up. My dad was a pastor and our church was a high-demand Pentecostal church. And several people that I remember who left went around the community lying about us. And it wasn't a surprise to us because we knew them and we knew why they left.
And when people choose to abandon and divorce themselves from this life, it often leads to the same syndrome of bitterness, hatred, resentment, and a desire to destroy the happiness of others. If they can't have it, they don't want anyone to have it. But they know the only way they could destroy it is by tainting it with slander and smears and slur. And that way they hope that they can take away our happiness too, but they won't be able to.